Hello and welcome again, everybody. This is Paul Sims speaking to you from iPharma in London, and you are here for today's webinar, which, as you can see, hopefully from your screen, is, there we go. It's called "What Can Pharma Steal from Innovators in Other Industries to Create a Total Customer Experience?" I always joke to friends outside of pharma that in our industry, we really want other people to speak the same language as us, but at the same time, we kind of want those people to tell us different stories. I think in pharma, we really consider ourselves quite unique, but we always believe, we have this belief that we are one step behind, whether it's our fault or not, and that people from other industries, people from other walks of life, could actually share some really interesting ideas and examples, case studies, and have a somewhat more progressive attitude that we can learn from. So we decided we would hit that head on in today's session, and I guess proof that what I've just said is correct is in the number of sign-ups. We've had roughly 1,000 people sign up for today's session, so it's clearly a topic that a lot of people care about. And I'm just going to speak to our motivation. Just going to show you also that be pleased to know that I'm not going to be addressing this alone today. I've got some fantastic people joining us, as you can see from the screen in front of you, 6 of them, including myself, and I'll be introducing them very shortly. But just a quick moment to talk about customer experience in general. It's an area that we've obviously been talking about now. It's nothing new, and it's an area that we have been prioritizing increasingly and being willing to invest more in. But it's also an area which we are all very familiar with as being the answer, and you can see the brands at the bottom of this screen, things that these companies have all taken very much to heart and have actually provided a genuinely different experience that have allowed them in each and every case to beat off some quite considerable competition. You know, there are obviously companies there like Tesla, for example, that have performed particularly well in the last few months. In fact, all of those organizations not too shabby at all. So, you know, we're obviously being inspired by people doing this right, and we are investing. We actually had a look, and 38% of pharma's commercial leaders say that they're actually prioritizing investment in tools that improve customer experiences. That's twice as much as say that they're investing in field forces, in medical or MSL engagement, or other initiatives that would be traditionally within the commercial sphere. The question, of course, is whether or not we are investing wisely. Are we making incremental steps? Are we making significant steps when we could actually be leapfrogging? And could we be taking ideas from the smartest minds from other industries, finance, retail, aviation, FMCG, anything really? So really excited that you guys can be here, and you know, a couple of little quotes appearing on your screen now to back up some of the things I've just been saying. We know it's absolutely critical right now. Something that you may remember doing when you signed up for this webinar is actually answering a question that we asked you at sign up. And that question was, which industry or industries do you look to most as influencers in customer experiences? So who do you think is doing it right? Who do you think will have a lesson that we in pharma can learn? And this is what the answers were. As you can see, it's a relatively broad spread with an emphasis on tech software and retail, shall we say, but also a significant minority on the other column there. So really, we are looking for quite a broad range. I actually want to, well, let me just do one more thing. I'm just going to show you a graph in the next slide. How does pharma measure up against other industries? This is from the Harvard Business Review. This is how others externally believe that we in our industry are doing. It might look like we're, you know, on the top half of this chart, but we do have a lot of gray areas, as you can see from that. And I don't think we can be too happy with our performance just yet. We certainly do aspire to be much higher on this graph, and we can see other industries that are just as regulated as we are in a better position. And those industries obviously particularly acute when they have a B2C component to them. which makes a huge amount of difference as to how people prioritize their investments. So yeah, we have room to grow, we have room to do better in. Okay, as I just mentioned, I want to go to you, the audience, as the first thing that we're going to do on today's session. So if you look at your screen, you will see a question pop up right now. Where do you believe pharma has most to learn from other industries? So it's not about which industry, this time it's about what you can actually learn. So I'm being particularly cruel during the session, the polls today. I'm only allowing you to choose one answer out of these 5. I'm sure you'd like to choose all 5. But what do you believe pharma has most to learn? Is it the internal organization, the agility, the attitude, and the culture that we see elsewhere? Is it more specific training skills and perhaps giving a mandate, giving a level of responsibility and expectation from those talented individuals that we are able to bring into the organization? Is it the true understanding of consumer or end user behavior, obviously the patient in our industry, but we certainly do often feel that other people have a much better handle on their end customers than we do in our industry? Is it about acting on data? Is it about revealing those insights and actually making decisions? So the emphasis on this point is actually acting on the understanding of the behavior and actually being bold enough to do so. Or finally, is it being open-minded, imaginative, bold, and holistic? So, you know, being creative effectively here in our approach. It does often feel that others in our other industries are either able to or do have far more imaginative campaigns and outreach opportunities than we do. So I can see that roughly 3/4 of you have voted. I'll hold that open 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, it's not training, that's for sure, down at 3%, but we actually have a reasonably good split across all of the others, with a slight winner of the data, revealing the insights, decision making, and truly understanding the consumer end. So it's really all about that understanding, it seems. That seems to be the winner here. And that's what perhaps we're getting wrong at the moment in pharma. We often obviously describe ourselves as being insulated against our ultimate customer, the patient, whether that's a good thing or not, and therefore unable to see or really appreciate the patient perspective. So that's very interesting. We'll go back to this graph perhaps later on when I can invite the others to take part in comments on that. But let me do a quick introduction to everybody properly at this stage. So Rob, first, top left, he's the Chief Digital Officer at Broadridge. He's actually spent 20 years really helping businesses getting the most out of emerging digital technology. Broadridge, if you're not aware, by the way, is a financial organization where he leads digital strategy and innovation for the Customer Communications Group. And his team ensures that banking, telecom, utility, insurance, and healthcare brands are engaging with their customers where consumers already frequent online. He's not purely digital, of course. He supplements traditional channels with new and emerging ways, and he's an expert in picturing the future in terms of what's in store for identity management, consumer engagement, customer preferences, and various different omni-channel and digital approaches. So absolutely fantastic you can be here, Rob. Thank you so much. Under his name is Neil. Neil is a name you may have heard of before because he's been doing some sterling work as the worldwide GM for retail and health in Microsoft. Really, he took on this role to reimagine and re-engineer the front door to health services. And, we all know that the likes of Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, they themselves as a customer-facing entities have a wonderful opportunity to really transform what healthcare means to us. And of course, we in the pharma industry want to follow hot in their heels and perhaps be even integrated with some of those initiatives ourselves. Really fascinating area, of course, for Neil to be interested in, and I'm sure, particularly based on the fact that retail and digital technology, IT, was so high on the previous graph, I'm sure Neil has a lot to contribute for us today. So thank you so much, Neil, for joining us. Under Neil is Dirk. Dirk actually works at RB, or Reckitt Benckiser. He is a senior global executive who specialized for many years in sales and field force effectiveness. actually with a pharma bent to the work that he's doing. So some experience both there and in the non-pharma areas as well. He's a leader in medical sales. So I've worked with Dirk a couple of times in the last year, and it's interesting how he has really bridged the medical affairs and commercial sides of the organization with some of the work that he's done. So really exciting stuff there. Got some experience at Nestle as well. So really pleased you could be here. So in the next column, we have Taylor. Taylor is the Vice President of Brand Communications at an unnamed firm. She's really representing herself today, but she has been the head of corporate communications at Pernod Ricard until relatively recently, and has held a number of very exciting positions in brand communications. And at the moment, she's actually working for one of the top cannabinoid organizations in the US, and is obviously working to open up a brand new segment here. Very, very exciting. She's been named as a 40 under 40 brand innovator class of 2019 recipient, and she's done some really exciting things in the corp comms, executive comms, social media, B2B, digital social strategy, and even crisis communication world. So very grateful you could be with us here, Taylor. Thank you so much. Sanjay, you may have had Sanjay. He's been on with us webinars before and in real life at our conferences. He's an EVP at Indegene, who have a strategic alliance with Microsoft. He's got an extensive global experience in pharma, consumer products, and medical education communications. He's been responsible for setting up new software as service businesses in alliance with Microsoft, and has been a leader in multi-channel marketing and product commercialization businesses, and was even the former CEO of a medical education provider for physicians and healthcare practitioners in the US. So obviously coming with a great wealth of experience. And I'd like to say, by the way, that Sanjay has been a great partner of ours in actually setting up today's webinar, him and his colleagues at Indegene. And without them, this webinar wouldn't even be happening. So they've been fantastic in getting so many of us there. And thank you so much to Sanjay. Last but certainly not least is Spencer, who represents AstraZeneca as the head of Commercial Learning Innovation Center. He's an experienced leader with a lot of history working in pharma, learning and development, and of course, building those commercial frameworks across the globe. He's an expert in consulting, in planning, in coaching, in sales, operations, and management. And he's got a real passion for people. 16 years at AstraZeneca and 2 years in the last role. So couldn't really wish for a better panel, really. I hope you're pleased that we've got this group assembled. Right, that's enough chat from me. I think it's time that you heard from somebody else, and I'm going to hand over now to Sanjay. He's going to give us a couple of slides, and then he's also going to introduce Neil after that. So Sanjay, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for that introduction and for hosting us today. It's always been interesting, but even more so in the last couple of years, where we are with customer experience in this particular industry. I have never seen, any published third-party research, and this one here from McKinsey is no exception, that puts us above 30%. And this is just kind of on the healthcare practitioner side of things. If we take a look at the patient side of things in the next slide, it's even more interesting where the expectation from the patient community to deliver better experiences from trial all the way to therapy is certainly there. Companies are even ramping up their investments in trying to accomplish that, but yet even the awareness of these services and these programs is low, let alone the satisfaction. Now, why does it matter? I don't think anyone would really debate why customer experience is important. As you were saying, it's really where the world is headed, right, for the years to come. But even if you look at important outcome measures like this one on the next slide from Deloitte on a study with various hospital systems, so it's from an adjacent area, not exactly in life sciences, but the idea is the same, that those institutions that are able to drive a better patient experience can ultimately see a strong correlation with even measures like net profit margin, which in this case was found to be more than 2 times, right, in those that created a higher level of patient experience versus those who did not. So it's clearly a really important area, and it translates to actual outcomes, like this one. Now, we have been quite excited about this particular opportunity, how much headroom there really exists to make a difference. And as a lot of we have the alliance with Microsoft to try and do something about that. Here's a good example of one of the life sciences organizations that we work with together with Microsoft, and what their vision around this really is to replace what they call, and I love this word, the stitch work of various platforms, which are really meant for the traditional ways of doing things, not really to create a comprehensive, completely unified customer experience. And they also do recognize the idea that this is about technological change, but it is also about culture change, about adopting a mindset in which we put the customer experience at the center, not so much the traditional functions or systems or ways of doing things that we've had. So it's still kind of in, I would say, the early stages, but things are moving quite rapidly, and we are kind of really excited to see this kind of a vision to actually come to life right in this industry, to really make something out of that opportunity to enhance the customer experience that clearly exists, right, as we were looking at some of the statistics before.
Thank you, Sanjay. Let me just bring Spencer in just to give a pharma perspective. I think he has something that can be added.
The one comment I was going to make is you looked at that formula around technology plus culture change, and I think we're almost in a prisoner's dilemma in the pharma world around changing that culture of, I think everyone recognizes the need to change, but it's also, I'm not sure the old model is broken. And so you've got the pressure of launching a new drug and trying to be patient focused and creating great customers experience, and still recognizing there are elements of what's happened in the past that's working. And so and a cultural impact of performance where people are almost like, okay, how much do I push the envelope here and how much do I want to change? And I think that's at the crux of it. It's that culture of, are we embracing and rewarding innovation and performance, or one or the other, or both? And so I think, as you mentioned those two things, I think there's that little bit of tug of war that we play as we're trying to embrace this and see other organizations and that are outside pharma doing this. Where is our place, and how do we do it so that we're not getting in trouble, but also pushing boundaries?
Spencer, just to throw in to that point, I think to throw in another item is that's not just in the pharmaceutical industry. I think that challenge is something that happens in financial services, happens in the broader healthcare industry and many industries. It's kind of that disrupting issue where you're thinking about how do you actually take something that's been very successful for so long, have a culture that's built on delivering in a specific way, and modifying that to really think about experience first. That's a challenge that a lot of industries are dealing with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of other industries, let's go over to Neil then, who I believe has a couple more slides from his perspective. So Neil, over to you.
Yeah, I'm just from a statistical perspective, it's interesting to note that from the time that I've been spending in the retail world is that you often see patient journeys from the healthcare side kind of depicted as a linear journey, when actually the flywheel of digital information that we can create in the retail world says actually it's more this kind of shape that you can see in front of you. You can bring in data, sure, from the right-hand side of this graph, which is health-specific data, clinical interactions, social determinants of health, which we know are extremely important. But actually, if you are starting to bring in and fully understand data that's highly personalized to the individual patient or consumer, and I prefer the term consumer as much as possible, that only that way can you start to create really actionable insights that come out of this area. And it's interesting, if you look at statistics recently, it's not a surprise, I think, from a recent study that 97% of people, this is a global study into the healthcare world, 97% of patients in this world said that they felt there was a significant or very significant opportunity to improve on the experience they were having from the healthcare environment. But that's not, you can see that as an opportunity, or you can see that as a problem. But also, if you look at it specific to the retail health clinics, people, I think, have presumed that people who are walking into, Walgreens clinics or Walmart, some of the new clinics that they're opening up, or many others that are out there today, including Boots, who are doing it in the UK, I know as well, they presumed it was all about convenience and timing, but actually 82% of them said actually it's the personalization that was important to them of the experience, the personalization experience versus just the timing. So really we've got to bring in this data from, like I say, from all sides of this equation and create this flywheel. It also includes ensuring, if you're thinking about the retail world, that the store associates understand and are able to interact with patient stroke customers in an appropriate way. And again, just fascinating from some of the early stage work that we've been doing with Walgreens, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, that actually even in this highly regulated, highly private industry of healthcare, that as long as patients understand how their data is being used and are seeing it as personalizing for them rather than necessarily just overtly targeting them, they can actually be extremely positive about putting data into this feedback loop. And let's have the next slide. That would be super helpful. Great. And so, one of the things that we've absolutely been trying to do is use some of the expertise that the retailers have had for many years in this kind of maniacal need to understand and personalize the experience from a competitive perspective and say, well, what does that look like if you bring it into the healthcare world? And what would a universal kind of golden consumer record look like that fully helps us personalize the experience? And look, we know this is important, not just from a kind of healthcare competitive or a drug competitive environment where we are competing with lots of options for the specific consumer, but it's also extremely important for driving both behavioral change and adherence. And the nudges and the behavioral changes that we're often asking as part of a healthcare regime are incredibly reliant on the personalization of the experience. And it's very hard to do this if you haven't really pulled all of this data together. And everyone loves the kind of the chocolate box that is machine learning and artificial intelligence to power all of this, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But actually the hard work, the kind of the broccoli and the kale, if you will, in the diet here, is that you actually have to do all of the back end integration and data work to bring all of this information together in a meaningful way and in a personalized way. And often the use of AI and machine learning is just as important in that space as it is in the front end of how we actually talk to the consumer. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, this is the kind of stuff that you get to do once you've pulled all that together, fully understanding customer sentiment, segmenting properly, understanding, and this is extremely important in healthcare, the idea of propensity for loyalty. Again, just very interesting when you look at some of the newer clinics that are coming in, the specialist clinics like Forward, for example, in the US here, they're really presuming, based on their business model and their payment model, this retail idea of really, I don't want to use the term locking in, but providing a very, very compelling experience which drives loyalty and really drives the consumer every time back to the same healthcare front door for that. Let's have the next slide. Many of you may have heard that Microsoft entered into a broad partnership with Walgreens Boots Alliance around about a year or so ago, really trying to help. And Stefano, who you see on the left-hand side of this picture, the CEO, is very clear. He says, look, Walgreens is a healthcare company that happens to run some retail stores, which is a very modest way when you look at the footprint that they have. But there's no doubt that the retailization of healthcare, not just from a proximity perspective, a physical proximity perspective, which is increasingly important in the healthcare world. And if you actually look at the numbers of footfall of consumers who walk into a Walgreens or a Walmart or various other of these huge retailers, and this stat absolutely knocked me out. They actually significantly outnumber the number of people who, on a daily basis, go to Google.com or go to Facebook.com, for example. So, having this local proximity and then this digital intimacy with customers is the kind of thing that we're trying to build with Walgreens. The idea of finding care, getting care, which includes the virtual care and virtual care assistants, and then managing care, coordinating care, all of the complexities that are around that are the kind of things that we're trying to do with the Alliance. And most importantly, and I think this is really important in the pharma world, which hasn't always been as open around data sharing, data provenance, and in fact business model kind of sharing. Probably the thing that is key and is at the heart of this alliance is that we are really trying to create an extremely open ecosystem, which includes, yes, not only the natural partners that we would expect Walgreens and Microsoft to work with, but in many cases people who would actually be thought of as our competitors. And really, the healthcare world, the healthcare pie is such that we believe very strongly that it's the kind of open ecosystem-based partnerships that will be most successful. And that's a true characteristic of what we're doing with Walgreens Boots Alliance. I think that's it for me, although I may pop it back in a little bit later to talk about Aurora.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Neil. Very interesting what you were saying there about the ecosystem and that being key. Just before I move forward, got a few people writing in. Will the deck be shared? Yes, you will all get a recording of this, so no need to ask me or email me. It will be sent to you. You can obviously listen back. You can share it with your team, however you wish. It will be ready a couple of days after today's session. We'll send it to you automatically. To those of you who've been sending in questions, thank you so much. Please do continue. I'd really like everybody listening in to be using the Q&A box on the right-hand side, or questions box, I think it's called. So please do write in. Diane Bryson writes that we've been talking about customer experience for so long in the life sciences industry that it's frustrating there's been such little change. Please comment on how you think the industry will be impacted when finally ratifying the FDA guidance regarding patient-focused drug development. And to our panelists who are not familiar with our industry, that's an initiative which obviously gets patient involvement in the R&D process, traditionally very opaque and very closed process that we've had in our industry. That's obviously aiding that there. How do you think this industry will be impacted? Does anybody want to answer that question before we move on?
This is Dirk here. Paul, what I would like to answer to that is, hello. For me, one of the big issues why we are still not moving forward as we could and should have expected is that at the highest level, there is still a kind of blocking thing happening between delivering, let me say, the business results to satisfy shareholders, and then really going beyond this whole paradigm. And it has been mentioned already before also by Spencer. It looks like the old model is not broken yet. And I think that today we are reaching a tipping point, as mentioned by you in your introduction, because there's a new generation coming in from both healthcare provider side, but also from the consumer patient side. And their expectations are different. And some of the boundaries, and I will come back to that later when I present, are really fading away. And I think they will really force us to change our game and to step up what we've been doing so far. Because it's right, it's the same when we also go to eyeforpharma. We hear it over and over again. We need to be customer-centric. We need to be patient-centric. We need to be consumer-centric. But the silos and how our organization is set up, how the incentivization is set up, everything is pushing towards results. Unless I think that really our customers and the patients and even the consumers really will say, come on, guys, this is not the way to do it anymore. We have other values and other expectations. And I think we are reaching that tipping point, and then it could go quite fast. That's my perspective.
Thank you, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But Taylor, you have been working in industries which I assume have focused towards a more youthful demographic. Do you think that we here in pharma are sounding like dinosaurs, and we need to buck our ideas up before we are indeed made extinct, or do you think we're doing what we can?
I think it's all incremental changes, right? So I think at the end of the day, you can't make full overhauls all at the same time. But I think it's that idea of kind of throwing things against the wall, getting feedback in real time and seeing what works. I think a huge component of that is actually listening to your audience, and then kind of pivoting accordingly. So I think you're moving in the right direction. I think it's just a matter of realizing that everything can't be accomplished at the same time. And along the way, kind of taking the time and doing the due diligence to really listen and get feedback and pivot when necessary. And I think if you use that approach, you're incorporating your audience, and also along the way, you can make those refinements. So by the quote unquote end, you have a pretty well-run ship.
Thank you. Okay, well, that gives us a little bit of confidence that we're not going too slowly. We're doing things at the pace we perhaps can only move at. But I am very interested. This actually segues quite nicely into a question I've prepared for the audience. So have a look at your screens once again. You will see a question has appeared. What is the primary ambition you have for your average customer journey 2 years from now? So, I'm just very interested to sort of hear what we sort of are trying to aspire to. Is it an omni-channel information and support, a world of information at our fingertips on demand as and when we need it to every potential customer? Is it increased empowerment, loyalty and advocacy, perhaps some of the things that we use as final measures or eventual measures of a good customer experience, and therefore translated into repeat revenues, repeat business for ourselves? Is it actually eschewing technology, perhaps, and going for a human-first medical or key account management single-point customer interface? Is that what we are aspiring to do, to be able to provide that human face at the outset and use technology internally to provide the understanding and differentiation that we need at that interface? Is it consistency and reliability across customer interaction? Companies like Amazon are often cited that this is where they do best on the customer experience side of things. It's not that they extend the arm, as it were, it's just that they have reduced the failure demand across the organization such that things are reliable and understandable and consistent across the organization. Or is it about having a blended experience? And you may have seen a slide showing there offline and online. Is it about providing a personalized experience that takes into account every potential type of channel? Okay, so got just over half of you voted. I'll hold that open 3 more seconds. Let's get those votes in. 3, 2, 1. And I can see already we have a winner. Let's have a look. A clear winner. 51% of people are talking about a blended experience, which ironically was the one I sort of added in here as somewhat of an afterthought when I was writing this list of things. So very interesting that it's been chosen by the majority of you. Really nothing else coming beyond a fifth of votes there. And right down at 5% is the human first. So people definitely thinking that digital interfaces are what we're aiming for of various different types. So very interesting points there, and perhaps that flows in nicely. Does anybody actually want to comment on those results before I move on? Any of the panel? Is anyone surprised by that, or anyone want to reflect on how that actually looks in their own organization?
I think it probably just represents how each of us want to be treated. So this is, my guess, is a reflection on how we want organizations want how we want to be treated by them, and I think that reflects in probably all the initiatives that we're doing. But that's my reflection. Is I think this is what I want from any organization that I'm buying goods from.
So you're not so interested in the human first. You're interested in choice. You're interested in a mixture as and when, and you're not interested in digital only either.
Yeah, I think it's quite enlightening too. I think the offline and online kind of combining to create that blended experience is a really important perspective, and a lot of organizations don't get there. They want to drive everything to the digital channel, and they miss the fact that actually their customers prefer this blended omni-channel experience where you communicate against both the physical and the digital. And so kind of understanding that is a really important point in the process.
And then I think the other adjective I'd add to that, if I was writing the question, would be transparent as well. I think people need to understand, not just because healthcare is a regulated industry and has very specific rules around privacy, but consumers really want to understand how their data, how knowledge about them is being used. They really want, if that's going to create a trusted long-term relationship, and again the loyalty that people are looking for, then there needs to be high levels of transparency, particularly around how healthcare data, genomic data, drug results data are going to be used specific to this part of the industry.
Yeah,
Dave Coolen writes in. Oh, sorry. Go on before I mention.
I just wanted to say, for me, the first and the last point, they are nicely connected with each other too, and especially the on-demand part from the first because that's exactly what it is. And I think today we are way beyond, we are way behind that goal, achieving that goal.
And I also think that, oh, sorry, this is Taylor. I was just going to say that I think, I think a lot of people, including myself as a general consumer, think to ourselves sometimes, to your point, we have all of this data. How can it not be seamless, customized, personalized, blended? You know what I mean? So I think I think the bigger question becomes sometimes, is it 2 years or should it be now? But I think outside of pharma, I think it's a bigger question in general as to what are people doing kind of with this data if they have it, and how can it more immediately be personalized to kind of accommodate everyone's lifestyle. So I think it's a bigger topic of discussion.
Yeah. So one questioner, Dave Coolen, makes a very good point, and I think I'll read it out. Pharma traditionally wants to control the interaction. This is no longer the case in other industries. How can we convince pharma to accept that the customer controls interaction and we need to become facilitators and enablers primarily? I think this is a key point.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a stick and a carrot to that, to be honest, for pharma. I mean, I think, the stick will be that as pharma gets more involved in value-based pricing, outcome-based pricing, it will just be something where they will have to realize that is going to become central to the relationship that they're going to have with their customers, whether they see them as the end patient customers or whether they see them as the kind of the distributors in the medical profession itself. But then there's a carrot piece here as well, which is the opportunity to bring in and provide more effective regimes, more effective treatments is going to be so much more broad and so much more differentiated when the experience that is being created is one that's more personalized and more trustworthy and patient-centric ultimately.
One more audience question that I'd like to address. To what extent do you think that the patent protections that are afforded to traditional interventional medicines and obviously result in mainly, in most cases, high profit margins, these actually shadow and block the exploration of more innovative and digital approaches to health that other industries are now pursuing? Do you think that we've got it too good in our traditional model to be able to be as experimental as we need to be, and we're going to end up shooting ourselves in the foot in the long term as other people take up that consumer space? I'd be interested to hear what you think, Neil, on that.
I was smiling as I was listening because it's a really good point. Look, the reality is that IP protection, which is kind of what we're talking about, is incredibly important for all industries. What I think is specific in the pharma world, given the cost of drug development and drug deployment as well, and the length of time that's taken for that, is that there are specific needs for patent and patent management that can often then make it look like there's the IP protection is too hardcore. It's not unlike a software company in many ways, right? You want to be able to protect IP that you have, but you also want to have the broadest possible spectrum of capabilities for distribution and use of the stuff that you're building. I think what is the really interesting part of that question, and whoever wrote it, wrote it really well, is actually it's the blended experience that includes digital experiences as part of it. I thought it was a very interesting move of Sanofi recently to, I'm going to forget the name of the company that they brought on, but they formed a major partnership for one particular set of drugs that they had that was with a digital mental health organization as well, realizing that ultimately the outcomes that they needed were going to be driven as much by the attitudinal, behavioral, mental health assistance that they could provide digitally as they were going to be through the actual molecules themselves. And so I think the point is really well made. I think the question is, should there be more broad access to IP? I think that will all depend on how there continues to be opportunities economically for that IP to then actually be monetized, which then creates more opportunity for more research and better drugs down the line.
And one thing I'd kind of like to add to that, I think a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about in the sense of IP protection and have we had it too good, and how do we make the changes? I think a lot of these things actually do have almost a single word answer, which is competition. And I mean, if you think about what is the big kind of players in healthcare in the future, it isn't going to be just the the providers and the manufacturers that we see today, right? It is going to be Amazon. It is going to be
Google, it is going to be Microsoft. And how will we compete, right, if we are, faced with that landscape? So yeah, traditionally, I think it's been optional, digital and experience and so on. But I don't think that optionality exists, right, in the years to come. And I think that's probably going to be, at least in my opinion, one of the big change agents.
Thanks. By the way, a couple of people have actually mentioned the combination of mental health as well as physical health being absolutely crucial going forward. So very interesting that you brought that up, Neil. And yeah, Sanjay, I think you're probably right. Whitney, hello, Whitney Baldwin writes, is there a pre-existing bias in terms of relying on the focus on clinical efficacy as the primary driver versus now provided a blended solution of science and experience? So do we need to somehow adjust our metrics? Do we need to address this at the payer level? That we need to somehow find non-clinical metrics as having equal or at least significant weight as we determine what works for us and what doesn't. I'll leave that as a rhetorical question, as I think we should move on.
I was just going to say yes.
Oh, go on then. Go on then.
I was just going to say yes. The answer. I think it's a really
okay. Well, good. I like the one-word answer. Let's move on. So, as you can see, quote from Donald Chestnut, the Chief Customer Experience Officer at Mastercard, absolutely believing that the blended experience is going to dominate. You can actually watch a video online from him if you're interested in following up with that. And indeed, many of these various different things are going to be absolutely crucial. One example here, Neil, did you want to talk about this, or are you not going to?
No, I'll just really briefly say, I think the interesting piece here for those of us who are in the software world is that the requirement is such that you can't just throw, I think, kind of what I've broadly called kind of horizontal generalized software at the problem here. This is a really interesting story from Aurora Healthcare in the Midwest in the US, and they really created a very, very excellent personalized end-to-end experience. And as part of the partnership that we had with them to create this thing, it became very apparent that the conversational AI-based bot, if you will, that we wanted to have to talk to them needed actually to be really quite specialized. And we ended up building with them and building now more generically a healthcare a specific conversational bot that allows you to bring in information from all these multiple different domains and different channels that we've been talking about, and it enabled them to create a very, very compelling and blended mobile experience for their patients. So just a kind of a case in point of all the things that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand over at this stage to Rob, who's going to give us a little bit of an injection here from the world of finance, which, believe it or not, in pharma, we're traditionally very, very excited by. So, Rob, over to you.
What's interesting is I listened to the dialogue today. A lot of the challenges that the pharma industry faces is very similar to what you find in financial services, though I think a lot of people view financial services as an industry that is quite digital. What I tried to do was identify a few different trends that I thought were relevant kind of on a global level across industries and probably very relevant in this conversation. So the first is something that's been called open banking. This is a EU directive called PSD2 because everything has to have a fancy name. And essentially what it did is it required all banks in the European Union to open up all of their services as APIs. So it's transactional capabilities, identity services, the ability to move money and make payments. And at first, the industry was very, very reluctant to this proposal, this idea. What's happened over the last 2 years since this went into effect in 2017 is not only has the banking industry, but the investment industry and the insurance industry have followed suit. They've opened up all of their services, and what they realized was that this was an opportunity to take the underlying platforms and capabilities that they provide and allow startups and other companies to innovate on top of them while keeping the underlying assets. So essentially, they're allowing people to create multiple experiences on top of the services that they provide, recognizing that they may not only be the only provider that provides the correct service for this company. And if someone can come up with a better mousetrap and they keep the underlying assets and they can monetize that, it works for everyone involved. So kind of one interesting trend. The next piece, which I'm sure a lot of folks on the phone are thinking about, is around data privacy. And GDPR in the European Union and in the US, California Consumer Privacy Act just went into effect, and we have 19 other states with similar data privacy regulations in process. And this scares a lot of folks in far as what can you actually do with information and how you can use data. And this often affects ideas and concepts around experience. One of the things that we often talk to our customers about is that smart organizations are actually using this as an opportunity to ask for permission. So imagine if patients actually provide permission to use their data and to derive certain outcomes and certain experiences, the data becomes that much more powerful and provides you with a license to do things that you may not have a license to do otherwise. The last piece, and all of this really fits into experience, it's kind of this combination of experience and your network, right? And it's, many organizations are kind of focusing on understanding the customer journey and how things are connected, and then associating that with actual consumer needs. One of the problems that we've recognized is that a lot of organizations have really focused on their desires versus the actual need of the end consumer, and the resulting experience has not actually been successful as a result, right? We have ideas, we want to get paid faster, we want to do these other services, we want to provide these capabilities. And probably one of the most notable is we want our customers to come to us. And consumer behavior is an interesting thing. If you think about your phones, there's probably 6 to 10 apps that you actually use on a routine basis, and there's a bunch of other apps that you never actually look at. Well, in the financial services industry, a lot of our clients spent tens of millions of dollars creating awesome websites, awesome apps with the idea that their customers were going to go there and get a whole bunch of value from that service. And what they found when released is that no one actually used these apps, or a very small percentage, 15, 20% of their client base, and they weren't as successful as they thought. And so understanding that your consumers may want to go someplace else and being able to enable that capability through channels that they prefer is kind of a really important lesson. And one of the stories I kind of gave as kind of in one of the pre-calls we had for this was a really interesting solution that was done by Deutsche Bank. So Deutsche Bank, their private banking group really is targeted at families that over $50 million plus in assets. And one of the challenges that they were dealing with was, how do you actually reach millennials? How do you reach the children of their primary customer? And through a bunch of investigation and user testing, what they found is that a lot of the children looked very similar. They were wealthy people that were entering the workforce, and they tend not to be actually working for them, for another company. They tend to be actually innovating and coming up with ideas because of the wealth that they had. And what they really were interested in doing was finding a place where they could actually communicate with other people who look like them. So rather than create a traditional wealth management app, what this firm did is they actually created a social network, which actually allowed these individuals to communicate back and forth and get assistance where I'm doing a startup and I need to answer these types of questions, and someone in a similar demographic could answer those questions. It's interestingly that they joked that as a result of that, there's been several weddings. So it's probably one of the more exclusive dating apps that you could possibly get into. But more interesting is Deutsche Bank is actually the one providing the underlying financing and the funding as these startups and these other tools actually get created. So they've created this network where people do not want to leave. And I use that example when I think about the pharma industry, where you have people that are using your products that want to talk to each other. They want to, the patients want to be able to speak to each other and understand experiences from each other. And it could be a really interesting way of leveraging the network of people using your product to create this social environment where people really gain confidence, and as a result, get that net promoter score, and they talk to others about their experience dealing with your brands. Can be very, very powerful.
Thank you. I can think of some of the alarms that ring in people's head of the reasons why they couldn't do something of that nature. But I think that nonetheless, there's a huge amount that can be learned there. Yeah.
Throw a quick point out there is that the alarms, and I understand those alarms. Think about consumers talking to consumers in unmoderated environments where you're not the ones actually controlling the conversation, right? So there's different ways of actually, I think, some of the questions up front as far as culture and technology and thinking through this, one of the things I often talk to our clients about, and I often talk to our internal people about, it's always easier to say no. Think about what we would need to do to get to a yes. Let's do it in very small pieces, right? So let's start small. Let's grow from there, learn our lessons. It doesn't have to be right 100% of the time, but we can start and we can quickly innovate.
Absolutely. Well, I think you made a very good point at the beginning with the open banking point. I often insult Pharma by telling everybody that we're still on Web 1.0, where we're really trying to digitize existing processes still, as opposed to trying to use technology to come up with different kinds of business models, and open banking being one of those that could never exist in an offline world. and I think there's tremendous opportunity for us in our industry to think more expansively about what Web 2.0 could look like. Yes.
And to highlight that, what open banking is actually, I think it was KPMG actually came out with a report last year, and they actually changed the name to OpenX, and the X actually stands for experience. And that the idea of opening up all of your capabilities and allowing people to kind of put them together in new ways is how you deliver the best possible experience for the end consumer.
Right. Well, this your mentioning of the millennial example actually flows very nicely into what we're going to cover just in final few minutes. And I believe that I can hand back to Dirk at this point. But just before I do, yes, there's a new generation. The new generation of HCPs are disrupting our industry. And of course, there's a new generation of patients too. Indeed, this statistic shows that 2014, which is 6 years ago now, was the digital native tipping point for prescribers. So actually, the majority of prescribers now would describe themselves as digital natives rather than traditional. So, you know, you're not marketing towards dinosaurs, that's for sure. And how can pharma leapfrog into meeting the expectations of millennial HCPs and patients? Well, Dirk, I'd like to hand over back to you.
Thank you. Please, you can go to the next build-up slide.
Indeed. Shall I build it all up?
Yeah, you can build it up.
Okay.
So it's just building on what already has been said. There's a tremendous shift happening, not only from a technology perspective, but also generation-wise. And we are the bad guys to talk about it because we are coming from already the past generation. But if you see what today is happening from both sides, from patient and customer side, is a big change, which really will have a big impact on how we as an organization, as the industry, will have to deal with that. For me also, there is what I see as a tangible outcome of that is a bit the boundaries between being an HCP and a consumer and a patient are fading more and more away, because there's a private time where also digital will play a role. For example, kind of e-consultations, then the electronic files. But outside the professional time, they become a consumer or a patient and they start chatting. We heard before these patient groups getting mixed also with patient HCPs, but in a digital way, is an opportunity again for us from an industry perspective. I think the biggest challenge we will have as an industry is, despite a lot of good examples coming out of the consumer goods, the service industry, is how do we combine or match the complexity to build this engagement model, this segmentation model with different personas, where we look at beliefs of customers, consumers, and our patients, and how do we bring that in a customized manner, or how do we use that and underpin that in bringing a customized, still value-adding message to all of them. So there's at one hand this complexity from platforms, technology, data management, which we need to build and where we need to invest in as an industry. And on the other hand, it has to be a simple, easy to understand message, which has to be differentiated. And one of the listeners of the audience raised the question, why are we still where we are today? Why are we not really customer-centric or patient-centric? And I think that's one of the reasons. We think too often that going omni-channel, to use a big word, is simply a bit reformatting your content, but it still stays what we want to say, and it's not taking into account the beliefs from the audience we are targeting. You can move to the next slide, Paul, where I will not take too much time, because it's already a very old saying also, we need to create value beyond the pill or beyond the till or whatever we are talking about. And there are many examples which I will not elaborate on for the sake of time. Going to my last slide, what I think we really will have to do is, as an industry, is really breaking down the silos, not only internally, but also between the industry itself, and creating, let me say, ad hoc alliances to really bring the best patient outcome and experience. It's about building experiences of which our products or our branded and unbranded solutions, if you want to call them, are only a small part. And that's what you see happening in more people, and especially the younger generation are looking for an experience they want to share the qualitative aspect. And I know there are many potential hurdles from a regulatory perspective, etc., but I'm sure that it will be depending on the courage and the boldness of certain of the industries to really say, okay, guys, let's do it, let's build it together with customers, together with governments, together with patients to bring really an experience and also transforming, I would say, regulatory and the corporate functions a bit more as an enabler rather than as a hurdle. So a lot of things that I think, and I'm quite optimistic, I believe really that in the coming years we will see this happening. And even from big companies working together with smaller companies to go beyond the actual model and really start looking at what the consumer, the customer wants, the patient wants. And I would put that against also the societal responsibility we are having as all big corporations.
Thank you, Dirk. Some very inspiring words there, and most definitely we need to all come together to make this a reality. The good news is I think that we genuinely all do want to come together and figure this out. I'd like to hand the microphone back to Sanjay at this point, who is going to take a look at how we can get increasingly sophisticated using AI. So Sanjay, over to you.
So of course, no conversation about transformation these days is complete without talking about AI and what it could really do and how it could really apply, right, in the real world. We are also interested in this, applied AI more than just, doing some new experiments or some cool new things in some one part of the organization. But, how do we broadly apply new kinds of algorithms, new sorts of intelligent models at scale, right, to this area of customer experience. One interesting way to think about this is really what some have referred to as the triple play of AI in the healthcare space, meaning looking for those particular types of opportunities, where we can get these new types of algorithms to make a difference in the cost dimension, right? How do we create, various types of optimizations, right, using AI technology? The operational dimension, how do we improve things like automation and compliance? And God knows there is a lot of those kinds of opportunities in the field of customer experience, just because, it could really be quite broad and deep. And then ultimately, probably most importantly, whether we can actually create the business impact, right, out of the AI applications that we think about, right, in the customer experience space. Because ultimately, that's kind of where the question of scale also matters. Trying to do an experiment in some one brand or one market is obviously a good approach, but it has to scale ultimately if it's going to create some type of business impact. So one example I can share with you is really around the use of AI algorithms. So if we take a look at the next slide, to create what we call as a deep customer graph. So here, you can see a little bit in the background where the models have actually looked at various types of interactions that have taken place with a specific individual healthcare practitioner. Have tried to analyze, what does that mean in terms of, either preferences or responsiveness and things of that sort. We also look at, how customers are connected with each other. So what we refer to as the relationship graph. That's obviously a big facet of customer experience that is often, ignored in most spaces, probably in life sciences even more so. But how customers and practitioners influence each other, even kind of at a day-to-day level, not just during a speaking event or a KOL program or something like this, but just at a day-to-day level, is often not fully used in the efforts to sort of improve the customer experience. And then ultimately, because a lot of the interactions, probably most of the interactions, in the most of the expectations, right, from the practitioners in the life sciences area is around specific knowledge topics, we can do a lot more to actually mine all of the all of the back and forth that happens in all different places, to really try to understand and form a picture of what is the individual customer actually interested in, right? What are the actual knowledge topics and specific scientific concepts that they may be interested in, because that helps them improve their particular sort of patient population's care. Ultimately, what we do with this deep insights is really to translate them into various types of predictions, what I like to call the best predicted experience. This goes well beyond things like next best action that have been used for quite some time. This is about looking at the entire range of possibilities. Customers don't really follow a linear journey, so where you can think about the specific next action, but it's really much more organic, much more chaotic, much more, and it should be, right? If somebody made the point earlier about all of us as consumers expect a consistent experience, even though we don't interact, with any particular organization that we work with in a linear fashion. So we try to mimic that using new AI algorithms, and the interesting thing about this best predicted experience is that it is a model that is designed for global use, right? So it is designed for scale using very interesting Microsoft technologies. It is designed to work in different countries. It doesn't depend on specific revenue data or prescription data or such, which may or may not be available. It makes use of the most that it can find, right, from the deep customer insight. So applications like this are possible, are being done, and probably need to be done, right, if we are going to bring forth the promise of AI in the area of customer experience in life sciences.
I would like to say a huge thank you to everybody. Whilst I do so, I'm actually going to, because I can see that we still have 90% of our audience with us. So just while I say these thank yous, have a look at your screen, and there should be a final question appearing. Sorry, I'll get it up there. There we go. Which you can do while I just say a final few words. Thank you so much to our panelists who've been really generous in contributing their time with us today. Once again, I'd like to say a quick extra thank you to Sanjay and to his team at Indegene. These guys have been fantastic partners. They are working extremely hard together with Microsoft to actually provide the platform to enable so much of what we've been talking about today. And I urge you, if you're not familiar with the full range of solutions that they're actually offering now, and it has evolved a lot in the past 12 months, to include, for example, patient experience management, then I do suggest that you do look at what Indegene are doing, and I'm sure that Sanjay and his colleagues would be happy to respond to you if you reach out. There's a question on the screen. Where would you prefer to see an increased investment in your organization for 2020-21? I can see about half of you have voted, so that's great. Just hold that open for 3 more seconds. It's either data IT, it's AI, it's customer-facing tools, it's integration of scientific and medical and that's health system expertise, or is it internal reorganization, the de-siloing, and the customer-centric design that we need to put in? 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at those final responses. There we go. Fairly broad, but actually it's the internal reorganization, perhaps the least sexy of all of the options on there, that actually wins. So that, again, is really interesting, and I think it's a level of maturity that that's showing there. So I'm very pleased to see that myself. And yeah, really interesting stuff. So yeah, as I say, thank you very, very much to each of our contributors today. And you can see their smiling faces once again. I'm going to hold open the Q&A box for 2 more minutes. So please do write in with any suggestions, any expressions of thanks and undying love, any ideas for what we can cover in the future. We'd be really, really interested to hear what you think of today's session and how we can make it better. So write in before you disappear, please. Please do come and join us at our event in Barcelona or Philadelphia. I certainly know that Sanjay and Indegene team will be in Barcelona, so please do come if you can. And really, really looking forward to seeing you face to face, where we can discover and discuss a lot more than we managed to do in a limited time frame today. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate your time with us, and we will be back with you very soon.